This evening, we have three entrepreneurs who have kindly joined us and are going to talk to us about some of their experience as they've grown businesses and have sort of stepped out into the world of entrepreneurship and all that goes with it. And this is always a really fascinating series of stories. Over the years, we've heard the sort of trials and tribulations of growing your own business and taking your venture forward. So this evening, we have Nicky Godding, who started the Business in Innovation magazine with her colleague Kirsty Muir. We have Chris Pinder, who's the founder of HD Anywhere and 1AV, a company that's here in Malvern, and Claire Cockerton, who's joining us from London. She's a serial entrepreneur and she's been involved in a number of real estate innovation centre type businesses. These are sort of big ventures in our capital. So we're going to be hearing from all three, but to begin with, we're going to be hearing from Nicky. So Nicky, thanks ever so much for joining us from the Cotswolds, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the Business in Innovation magazine.
Thank you very much. Hello, good evening, everybody. Right, well, I'm the editor of Business Innovation magazine. I'll just show you a couple of copies of it. There you go. It's a regional business magazine. It goes out to about 10,000, or it went out to about 10,000 recipients. We'll talk about that later. But over the last 6 months, we've taken it online and actually learned an awful lot of stuff, and in some ways probably taken it further than we would otherwise have done in the circumstances. So in the depths of a pandemic, you can actually be you have to be innovative and entrepreneur and have a real sense of an entrepreneurship. I started the magazine, I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I started off as doing public relations, and soon decided I didn't like people telling me what to write. I preferred to research and write it myself. So I moved quite quickly into journalism, although I had a few PR clients on the side because they do pay quite well sometimes. I ended up gadding around Europe for about 12 years, reporting on retail real estate. So it sounds quite a glamorous life. And I was only talking to one of my previous journalist friends about it the other day. You know, you spend one night in Berlin and another night in Munich and another night in Nice, and flying all over the place. And you think you're terribly important. It's very tiring. But frankly, retail real estate, which is what I was writing about, is only really so interesting. You can only really write about so many shopping centres. And I was starting to write more broadly on business. And what really interested me was the making things, the manufacturing and the tech and the engineering. So I started writing more broadly, coming back to the Cotswolds, for a magazine called Cotswold Life. And we launched a magazine called Cotswold Life Business. And I never really thought I was an entrepreneur at all until about 4 or 5 years actually after having launched the magazine, when I was being told by the big guns over in Norfolk what to write about and how to write it. And I just thought, sod you, I'm mid-50s, I can do what I like. So probably unlike some of your other interviewees, I'm probably a lot older being an entrepreneur. I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur. But when you have that sod it moment, when you think actually you could do better than somebody else, and you don't really don't like somebody else telling you from the top what you're going to do. So we launched our own magazine. We walked away from the magazine, and literally the next week or 2 weeks later, we registered the magazine and launched it and began work on it. Now, what I discovered when we were doing this, that I can write really well. That's the one thing I can do. And my co-director, Kirsty, can sell really well. But we hadn't got any idea about running a business. And it's been a roller coaster of the last 4 years. We've actually done very well. And the reason we're still trading is the fact that we have made money over the last few years. And this year, we were going to expand. We were going to double the issues of the magazine. So we had a bit of a war chest of money, and in all honesty, we've had to live off that money since March because our income has dropped about 95%. The magazine, the business model of the magazine was mostly in the printed magazine and the ads in the magazine. What we had to do really quickly, we had an online presence and we were running stories, but I had to adapt and use that awful word that everybody's using at the work, which is pivot. We pivoted online, And we started running an awful lot of news stories online. I think you always have to look at it from the other person's point of view. Why are they buying off you? Why do they want to engage themselves with you? Why do they want to come to you rather than anybody else? And it's because we were trying to give people hope. The biggest business and innovation magazine is we try and make it inspiring and colourful and thought-provoking. And I think that's why people read it, because and they read online. In fact, our online visitors have gone up about 400% since March, April, and they've continued rising because we put about 20, 30 stories up a day. They're stories from across the region. We go researching very hard. I laugh, and I tell people my team of researchers, but actually at the moment it's me. I'm sitting in the office that you can see here, and I'm here from 9 till 6 most days, researching and writing. And there is a lot of really good stories still out there. Yes, a lot of companies are having a torrid time with the pandemic, including my business. But on the upside, there are always winners, and that's what we try and report on. It has been difficult. If I wind back and talk about the problems that we faced as a small business, as I said earlier, I'm probably a slightly older entrepreneur and slightly than anybody else. Running a business, what we found running a business, actually, it's the staff that are really tough, because we had 2 staff, we furloughed both of them, we ultimately made one redundant, which we were very sad to do. But we've now, very excitingly, brought the other one back from furlough. So we're back up and running. It took us about 3 or 4 months to really have a plan. I don't think if you're in the publishing industry, which is what we are, you can't, the first few months we were on our knees. We didn't know what to do. We were churning out stories. We thought we've got to keep the brand alive. We've got to keep it positive. We've got to keep showing people across the region that actually businesses still thrive. Many businesses still thriving. We've got to report what the government is saying in a way that meets the region's needs, and understand what it is for what they need to understand, what they need to understand. But it was really tough. We couldn't really plan ahead. We were going to launch another printed issue of the magazine in November, but what's the point? Because nobody's in their office and the magazine is delivered to offices. So I was talking earlier on about our 10,000 subscriber list would have gone down to 5,000 because a lot of people have lost their jobs or they're only working from home. So there's no point spending all that money on printing and publishing a magazine if nobody's going to read it. But we have done some planning. We've looked at the future. And most of all, we've listened to our advertisers and the people that read us, and they are saying they want a printed magazine and they like what we do, and so we're going to move on and print next March, which is great. So I'm starting to research topics for the March issue of the magazine. If I talk a little bit about what I do, apart from running the business on a daily basis, the most important thing about this region, that's Worcestershire, we cover Worcestershire, Warwickshire, Gloucestershire, and then we now move into the Thames Valley as well, is that there is so much going on and there are so many opportunities for companies in areas, and the government, the government is spending money in many areas. A lot of companies are making the most of that. They're investing in sustainability. I was reporting a story earlier on today where actually the angel investors are still investing. Yes, they're investing a little less per company, but they are still investing. There is a lot of money out there looking for a home, and it's not just government money or CBILS money. There is money there for companies. And they are, they will, if companies go looking for it, they will find an ear to talk to. I ran a story today about a company in Malvern who have just been bought by a large care home company. Actually, I can't remember the name of the company now, but there is still an awful lot going on if you look for it. From our point of view, we are, as I say, we're planning for the future. We've got to. With a publication, really, that you've only got one unique selling point, and that is, well, 2 unique selling points, actually, your brand, which is, our brand is strong, and our database. And those are the 2 things we're going to invest in the next few months. So we are developing a new design for the magazine. We brought our member of staff back to work on the database, and that is going to be really difficult, because researching a database, when a lot of people every day, LinkedIn is saying, I'm looking for new opportunities, or I've moved somewhere else, or I'm setting up my own consultancy. It's going to be tough for us, I have to say. But we are doing the best that we can. And I'm trying to bring all my years of working for other people, of looking from other people's point of view into our business, and both get through the next few months and actually I'm really positive about the future, because if you look at the way things have gone over the last few years, I mean, I'm old enough now to have gone through a few recessions. And most importantly, I remember the 2000 and 2007-8 recession. At the time, I was in Munich covering a big retail real estate conference. And I remember going there and as a reporter, and every single person was in a black suit, and it looked like the biggest funeral you've ever seen in your entire life. But fast forward 3 or 4 years after 2007-8, and the investment started flowing in. And then if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we would have still been on a roll. So you have to look longer term, not shorter term. And you have to be brave, I think. And bravery is something I've never really done before, because when you work for other people, or you freelance, you don't have to be brave. You just have to rely on other people. But learning to be brave has been actually a lot of fun, I think. So pretty much that's the way I look at it at the moment. So I'm not sure if you've got any questions, but that's pretty much the story I have to tell.
I mean, while you were speaking there, Nicky, you also mentioned, the key things with your business is, I think, the brand and the database. And obviously the database is a moving feast at the moment. But tell us a little bit about the brand, because how have you managed to get that so strong?
Okay, I perhaps didn't focus enough on when we started in the first place. So 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when we walked away from our previous employers, Kirsty and I, we said, what can really set us apart? So we paid a lot of money for a good branding agency in Cheltenham to work on the design for the magazine. And they were great, actually. They looked at all the magazines that were out there, and they worked with us to say, what do you want to promote? What is going to give you a very strong visual image? And although I love to think that people read every single word I write, I'm not stupid enough to realise that. So the magazine as it stands is, as you can see, is a very strong, clear brand. So that will differentiate itself from everybody else on the newsstand, if we had newsstands. But certainly if it pops through a business's letterbox, they know exactly who it is, and that's really important. So you have the brand is important, and within the magazine there's always good visual images, good photographs. There are 2 things I don't do, you'll never see in our magazine. One is a person sitting in front of a computer, because I think it's the most boring thing imaginable. And the other thing is, I hope nobody's offended, but a man standing with his hand over his goolies in a photograph, because that is very funny too. And it's just not interesting. So that is the strong brand. So quality, visual impact, creativity, and short bite-sized bits of information that people can read and absorb. So it's not long form, they call it long form reads. It's short, bite-sized pieces of information. And actually that was one good thing, that when we went completely online, it's very easy to replicate that visual image online, and that's what we do. So every single story on our online news has a photograph attached. If you click on the story, there's often 2 or 3 other photographs as well to illustrate the story. Because some of the things I write about are quite technical, and frankly, I don't understand some of them. I was writing a story today about a company in Oxford who I've got about £2 million worth of funding for antiviral antibodies, viral vector antibodies. I don't understand that. I know it's important. They've been given £2 million to do it. So the visual images will help people absorb that information. That's really important, I think. So the brand is something we're very precious about. We don't hopefully dilute that brand if we can possibly avoid it. And it stood us in very good stead. The only problem is, actually, if any designers ever watch this, it's very difficult finding an image that's going to sit in that slot there every single time. So this is a 60 top innovations we did. It's one of the early magazines. It had a beautiful Dyson hairdryer in it, which sat there beautifully. But then I did another story on GCHQ and cyber. It's very difficult getting that image, if you can see that in the photograph. And similarly, so we have a lot of arguments about the images that go on the front page. So the brand and the design is really important. It doesn't matter whatever, I would actually go further than that. I would say whatever industry and sector you're in, brand is very important.
And the other thing that you talked about, of course, and we've all had to go through this when we're running businesses, is with the adaptation to things like the furlough scheme and so forth, and CBILS and other types of funding. I mean, how were you able to get the information you needed and react quickly? What mechanism did you use?
Okay, well, it was just sweating over the government websites a lot of the time. I have to say, the government's taken a lot of sticks, some of it justified, some of it not. But what the government, I did think, did get right for very small businesses, that when we put our staff on furlough, that money was in our account within 48 hours. And actually 24 hours subsequently. And we also recently, just before the closing date, we applied for a CBILS loan, just in case we needed it. That £50,000 was sat in our, was with us again within 72 hours. It was really fast. So the advice, did we go for external advice? No, we didn't. We did the research, and our accountant helped us with the furlough scheme funding and all the rest of it. We did the research on the CBILS, and actually that was fine. I mean, more difficult was and time consuming was making a member of staff redundant, and I now know why every small business says that staff management is tough, because it is, because the smaller you are, the more each member of staff means to you, and you know their story, you know about their kids, you know what the issues their husband's having, if any, and that was really upsetting and caused me a few sleepless nights. The other thing that actually upset me right at the beginning is the fact that as a small business, we have a lot of freelancers. I had freelance writers, photographers, events management team, and I had to let all of them go. So that was a phone call to each one of them, you know, listening to their woes. And as we know, the events industry is having a terrible, terrible time of it. So I have to say, from a motivational point of view, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I've brought up 3 children. It's really tough. So I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. But the reason we did it, again, going back to my early comments, you have to be brave, because if you're not brave, we wouldn't be here. If I'd still employed those people, all the money would have gone out of the door. I wouldn't have had anything to give them, and we wouldn't be trading. So you have to be tough. Cool to be kind, I guess.
Yes. Well, we've actually got a couple of questions in the chat, which is great. So Beryl has asked, well, she's made a point first and then asked questions. So I will read and paraphrase what's written, because I don't think the attendees can necessarily see this. So Beryl has said that it's important, well, she thinks it is really important that entrepreneurship is an appropriate career choice for those of us in the later parts of our working life, making reference to you saying, I think, that you felt that you were a rather older entrepreneur. So given that, she says that it allows us to choose wisely how we use our time, to manage our income, and to utilize the many skills we have developed over our employed careers. In other words, leveraging on the experience. And she asks really what your view is on that, as well as the differences between having to go out and earn your money as an entrepreneur and the fact that in a job you draw a salary, and sort of managing that. Yeah,
I mean, that actually, I didn't point out, there is a dichotomy between me and my co-director. She's just over 40, I'm 58 now. And yeah, is it a wage packet at the end of the month, do or die? Well, yes. Of course it is to a certain extent, but not half for me. I mean, I'm lucky. I've got a nice house. I don't have a mortgage anymore, so I can take risks there. Whereas for her, it's more of an issue. So yes, Beryl is right. You know, for me, can it be a work-life balance? Certainly when we started the business, it was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. There was no lack of investment in time and energy in wanting to get this project off the ground. It didn't matter whether I was 24, 34, 44 or 54, I still wanted to get it done. But if the business hadn't made money, and it pretty much did from day one, but although I didn't take a salary for 3 months, we just, you know, got on and did it. If it hadn't have worked, would I have been on the streets? No, I wouldn't. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't. Did that give me? Did that allow me to make different choices? Probably yes. We were allowed to be a bit braver because we knew that we wouldn't be destitute if it didn't work.
Yeah. So, and I think I've often thought that the older you are, the more experience and maybe the more backup you have. But in some ways, the more you have to lose. When you're younger, you don't necessarily have as much to lose when you take the risk. So it is a really difficult balancing act. Gordon Fong has also asked a question. So a couple of questions, but the first one was to do with using local peer groups to help share ideas and whether you use those, and how beneficial has networking, mentorship even been?
Networking is essential. Kirsty and I turned up to the opening of an envelope and every networking event we could possibly attend to begin with, partly to sell the dream to everybody else, but partly to listen like crazy as to what was going on. So we couldn't have done without it, and I have missed dreadfully the networking part of the lockdown. I haven't done Zoom that much because although I'm not getting used to it now, at the beginning, I just felt it was incredibly forced. I think we're all much more natural now on Zoom. But yes, networking is massively important. Mentorship, not so much, because until recently, and thinking about a forward strategy, we didn't need mentoring so much as just to keep the business going and keep the stories going and churning. It was a bit of a sausage machine, but networking I have missed, and yes, it is absolutely essential.
And actually, I was just chuckling to myself because Gordon's second point was actually pretty much what I was saying, to do with being older and younger and mortgages and risks and so forth. So he says, how did that affect your choices? But I think that was kind of as you were answering as well in the previous question. So we can always come back to that if we haven't quite answered your question, Gordon. And then I think there's a final question from Florian, who says, query about moving the business from printed to online.
Yep.
Do you notice, or do you expect an increase of competition from external publications expanding into the Cotswolds market, and how would you react?
Oh, well, that's quite funny, actually. We have noticed that we have a couple of publications have launched business sections to their publications, and that makes me chuckle, because I think probably they think it's actually quite easy what we do. It's like anything else. If you do something really well, it looks easy, and that's great because it does look easy. But behind the scenes, there's a lot of knowledge that goes on. And actually, being the age I am, banging on about it, but being the age I am, I know quite a lot of stuff, and I know a lot of people, and actually also I can start putting that jigsaw together. So, one bit of information comes from one end and all the rest of it. It isn't just a question of churning out, taking a press release and putting it online. We are happy with competition. We actually know we'll always win because we're really good at what we do. That sounds really arrogant, but actually it's the one thing we know we're really good at. Behind the scenes running a business, there's lots and lots I could learn, but actually the business itself, I think we've got it right. But having said that, finally, we in the last 3 weeks, we've really decided to look at what we do, because you can always do better, and actually you can always do much better. So the product we launched 5 years ago was really good then, and I'm still very proud of it. But the business landscape has changed, and people want different things. So to answer the question, we're actually got our online going. The online is now a good daily news service with a lot of good stories up there. The magazine, when we reprint it, is going to be much more analysis and platform. So we'll always look at technology. We'll always look at skills. We'll always look at the green agenda, because this is what people seem to be interested in. So actually, what the pandemic has done is said, take the magazine in a slightly different direction, but focus on the online, because people are happy with online. That's where they get a lot of their news, and whether we like it or not, the networking isn't going to last. It isn't going to come back for another 6 or 8 months, I think, very sadly. I don't want having to network with somebody with a bandage over my face.
No, very true, very true. Great. Well, thank you, Nicky. There is another question, but I'm going to save that for the panel at the end. So we're going to hear from the other two entrepreneurs, and then we're going to sort of reconvene all of us so that we can take more questions jointly, as it were, and have a discussion on all the points that have been raised. So Gordon, I will leave that one a little bit later.